your laptops, open up the email that I sent you this morning. Morning.
And she turned around and was her. It looked like it from the back. Oh my goodness.
I like short circuit.
You look better than her.
All right, once again, open up your laptops, open up the email I sent you this morning.
Anthony's on his way.
Oh, you mean it's late?
Home, I found out when my day and
Okay, so the plan for today is I went ahead and constructed a nice new little multifamily residential financial model that you guys can then take and modify, obviously for the project, to the extent that you want to add in whatever bells and whistles and other interesting things that you may want to do. But what I was trying to do with this is to cover your bases, okay? At an absolute minimum, the kinds of pieces of information that you need to make sure that you include. Now, in terms of the formatting of this, you can rip it apart and do something totally different. You can also, like I said, just kind of take and slightly modify it. But this is not an example of what's going to go or not. In other words, you're not going to put this whole model on your PowerPoint slide, okay? You're going to take bits and pieces from it and put on your PowerPoint slides, okay? Now, this model, or a variation of it, may be what you include in your written report. But in terms of what's going to go up on your PowerPoint slides, you need to obviously kind of condense it down and reformat it and that sort of thing. Okay, so here's what I did. First of all of the yellow cells are input cells, okay? So those are the ones that you're going to change. Everything else is basically an output cell or a calculated cell. Okay, everybody good with that? Starting off, all right? So the first thing that we did was to go ahead and sort of say, okay, we need to figure out what our unit mix is for this particular multifamily project, all right? And so by unit mix, what we mean is, you know, how many different sort of model types do we have? And for those, you know, kind of what's the description? 1 bedroom, 1 bath, 2 bedroom, 1 bath, so forth, so on. But then more importantly, what is the mix of the units? How many of each do we have? What is the square footage of each of those? And then ultimately, what would be the rent per month per unit, okay? Everybody understand that? Pretty straightforward. Okay, so those are the 3 inputs that you've got to have. Now, do not, and I don't know how many times I can say this, do not accept those are accurate numbers. I just pulled those out of the air, okay? Just as an example, okay? So under no circumstances should you rely on any of those for your project, okay? These are simply examples. All right, so starting over here with column G, we have the rent per square foot per month. Now the reason I do it that way is the normal convention in the residential market is to quote rents on a per square foot per month basis. So that calculation is nothing more than taking whatever the rental amount is divided by the square footage in the unit, okay? So in this case, 1,000 divided by 500 gives you $2 per square foot per month. Everybody cool with that? Yep. Okay. Then what I did was to calculate what is the rent per year per unit. Okay, so here, all we're doing is basically taking, all right, we've got, in essence, $2 times 12, which would be $24 per square foot, times basically the square footage, or you can work it out and just simply say, take the rent per month per unit and multiply it by 12. Okay, and I think it's what I did in the spreadsheet. Okay, so that's just pretty much the monthly rental times 12. Then for the rent for the year, for the total, this is taking all of the units at that particular type. So in this case, $12,000 a year times 100 units will give us a 1.2 million. Okay, same process all the way down. Okay, so the total income that this property would generate would be 8.4 million for the year. Okay, everybody cool so far?
Yeah.
All right. Now, as we sort of go down the spreadsheet here, what I did was to come up with a set of basic assumptions. Once again, you can kind of come up with your own and modify these as you see fit, but I just tried to come up with some basic ones to kind of get you started. So what I started off with was one of the assumptions is what is going to be our annual growth rate in rents, okay? You know, and that makes the assumption that every year we're going to basically say to our tenants, we're basically raising your rent by 2% a year, okay? Now you may say 2% is too high, you may say it's too low, that's for you to decide, okay? Or you could keep it flat, you know, once again, all your decision. All right, so how is that going to be operationalized in the actual pro forma statement? Okay, so the first thing that you should notice is that 8.4 million that we have up here in terms of our total annual potential gross income simply gets pulled down here as our year one PGI. Okay, does everybody see that? That's pretty much mission critical that you get that. All right, so once you've got that number, the 8.4 million, to then calculate forward any sort of rental increases from one year to the next, all you're going to be doing is basically taking that, in this case, the previous year, and multiplying it by 1 plus the growth rate, in this case of 2%. So if you look at the formula for the cell here in year 2, that's what you're seeing, okay? You're seeing taking basically year 1 times 1 plus the growth rate of 2%, and that simply is multiplying it by itself plus the 2%. Okay, everybody cool? All right, and then each subsequent year, basically same thing. You're multiplying the previous year times the growth rate and so forth. Now, what you can see is if we go up here just real quickly and we change that to 0, well, what does it do? Everything's the same from that point forward, okay? So that's obviously an assumption that you could make, all right? We could also grow it by something really, you know, crazy, 5%, well, then we're going to have to change our year 6 in terms of the okay, there we go. In terms of the, so we could go, you know, whatever rate that you want to put in there, that's up to you. All right, so go back to 2. All right, now, the next one. Okay, vacancies and collection losses. Okay, so up here, I've given you an assumption that the annual vacancy and collection losses as a percentage of the potential gross income is going to be 15%. What's the difference between a vacancy and a collection loss? Once again, the vacancy is the unit is empty. Collection loss is a tenant that's there not paying the rent. Okay, everybody clear? Okay, I know I'm going kind of fast for some of you that are brand new to this, but hopefully, you know, you're able to kind of pick it up and then also maybe ask some of the other folks as you kind of get into this a little bit deeper. Okay, next line item. In this case, our other income. Other income, in this case I'm saying, could be from parking, vending machines, whatever other ancillary sources that you may have for other income. We're just going to put that as a flat rate of $200,000 for the first year, but we're going to grow that at 3% a year for every year thereafter. So we apply the same logic that we did to the rent in terms of that growth. So obviously from year 1 to year 2, a 3% growth represents $6,000, okay? Make sense?
Yes.
All right? Moving on. Okay? Then we kind of go on down, we calculate our effective gross income. Once again, just simply taking our potential gross income, subtracting our vacancy collection losses, adding in our other income, so we get our effective gross income. Then we say, okay, for this particular property, 35% of our effective gross income is going to be attributed to operating expenses. So once again, this is going to be, everything from common area utilities to property maintenance, repairs, property insurance, property taxes, not income taxes, but property taxes, and anything else basically associated with the running and operation of the property. Okay? Everybody cool?
When they say not pass through to tenants, that's
Yep.
the same thing.
Yep, correct. In other words, the property owner is paying that cost. Okay? Because in an apartment complex, many of those costs are going to be absorbed at the property level. The only thing that the tenants are going to be responsible for are going to be their own utilities. Okay? They're not going to be responsible for property taxes, they're not going to be responsible for insurance, or at least the insurance for the property as a whole. They're not going to be responsible for maintenance and so forth, all of that's, sort of included. So you've got to figure out, well, what is the appropriate sort of percentage or amount that would basically be covered by the property owner, in this case 35%. Okay? All right, so that gets us, obviously, operating expenses all the way across. Okay, everybody 100% okay up to this point?
Yes.
Okay, now, this is where it starts to finally get into maybe not so much new territory, but less covered territory. So let's kind of scroll down here just a little bit. All right. So that gets us all the way down to net operating income, okay? So everybody should be pretty comfortable with that, yes? Okay, now, this is, as I said, for some of you, this is brand new. For some of you, you don't quite remember this, and for some of you, you know exactly what we're doing, okay? So let's just sort of kind of start with that. All right, so if we've got our net operating income, and the way that I'm working this model is basically saying, all right, we're working this from the approach that we know what the income is on the property, we know what our expenses are, but now what we want to know is basically how much debt can we take on, okay? And one of the ways that we can figure that out is by the restrictions that are placed upon us by the lender. Okay, and those of you that once again are brand new to this is sort of brand new, but some of you, like I said, you already kind of know this. But one of the things that lenders will do is they will set limits on a couple of different ratios. One of those is the debt service coverage ratio, and the other one is the loan to value ratio. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about those real quickly. So the debt service coverage ratio is equal to the annual net operating income divided by the annual debt service, okay? Now, what this means is if a lender has set a debt service coverage ratio, a minimum debt service coverage ratio of 1.30, then what that is basically saying that your net operating income needs to be 30% higher than your annual debt service, okay? Now your annual debt service is your principal and interest payment that you're making to the lender, okay? That total combined dollar amount. Now, at this moment, with the way we're approaching this, the interest rate that you're paying on the loan is irrelevant. The term on the loan is irrelevant. What is relevant is the lender is looking at this from the perspective of how many dollars do you have in your back pocket as a result of this property and the income that it's generating. That's the way they're looking at it, okay? Then we can then begin to look at terms in terms of the actual interest rate on the loan and the actual duration or term of the loan. Does that make sense? Okay, so in this case, for this particular one, we're saying that our net operating income for that first year, and that's how this is really going to be based, is on projected stabilized NOI. That's $4,771,000 even. Okay, so all you're going to do is take and solve for, in this case, the annual debt service. You're going to take the $4,771,000 divided by 1.3. So let's see what we get. You should get $3,670,000. Does that match up with what we've got up here?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where that number is coming from. So if you actually look at the formula for that cell, that's what we're doing. Okay, we're simply taking what is the annual net operating income the property is expected to generate, and what is the minimum debt service coverage ratio that the lender will allow, and that is what is going to determine how large of an annualized monthly pay or annualized payment of principal and interest the lender is willing to allow. Okay? Now, just once again to make sure that you're understanding this, what if the lender were to say, all right, we're just going to require a debt service coverage ratio of 1.
477.
So that would mean they would allow you to have payments equaling what your actual net operating income is. They would never, ever, ever do that, okay? The only reason I'm pointing this out, because why would they never let you do that? Because they would not want to put themselves in a potential loss position. Because here's what you're sort of saying with that, is if this is the income we're expecting to generate, and then the lender is saying, okay, take every single dollar that you have generated, supposedly, from this property and pay us that. They're not going to go for that because they know that any project, there's going to be variation from month to month, year to year, in terms of the performance of that property. So for them, this whole adding this extra, in this case 30%, is a cushion for them, all right? So that your income can go down, they're still going to get paid. That's all they care about. Pay me, okay? They don't care about anything else, they want to get paid, okay? So if that's the case, let's take a look at what if they become even more restrictive and say you've got to have a 1.5 debt service coverage ratio. 4,771 divided by 1.5. So what does this mean? That means the amount that you're going to owe them is less, but it's also what it's doing is it's basically saying they perceive this project or this project type to be really risky, and they don't trust your cash flows to be that high, so they want to build an even a bigger sort of cushion, in this case a 50% cushion, but that also is going to have an impact on the amount you're going to be able to borrow. It's going to lower the amount that you're able to borrow simply because that payment's going to be less. Does that make sense? Okay? Is everybody comfortable? That's an extremely important point to this whole model. All right. So, once again, based upon the 1.3 debt service coverage ratio, now modified, just to sort of prove, I guess, what I'm sort of saying here. If we go up and we change it to 1, whoops, all right, then you can see, okay, just like I said, you change it to 1, then basically you're saying the annual debt service can be that $4,771,000, which means you have $0 left, and you know the lender's taking a pretty big risk that you're going to be able to have that full amount to be able to pay them. Okay. And then if we change it to 1.5, okay, should match up with what we got over here on the board, 3180,667. Okay. Everybody cool with that? All right. So we can change it back to the 1.3 just so we Whoops. Ah. What did I have that, okay, what did I have that at actually?
75.
75.
75, okay, so I don't want to screw that up. Okay, 1.3. Okay. All right, everybody cool up to this point?
Yeah.
Okay, now. All right, so once we've got that, then that allows us to calculate the before tax cash flow. So we subtract out the annual debt service from the net operating income. So before tax cash flow, the simple way to think about that is the amount of money after you've paid all of your bills, you've paid off your lender for that year, the amount of money that you technically get to take home before you have to pay the IRS. Okay? Now, most projects, especially the kind of projects that you guys are doing, you really don't need to go beyond for the purposes of the project and what your judging panel and everybody else is concerned with. We really don't need to go beyond before tax cash flow. And what I mean by that, those of you that have taken the investments course, you know that followed from that would be depreciation, dealing with amortization of points, dealing with your income tax rate, dealing with the partner splits and all that other sort of stuff that we don't need to get into for the analysis for a project deal. Because here's the thing. If you're sort of pitching this to an investor or you're just simply looking at it from the feasibility perspective, as long as this number is positive, then technically the deal is theoretically viable, at least from purely a cash flow perspective. Maybe not from a return perspective, but from a cash flow perspective, it's viable, okay? Is everybody cool with that? Yes, no, possibly could be. Okay, now, so let's scoot up a little bit more. And we're going to come back to the debt service coverage, or the loan to value ratio. Actually, that should get us where we want to go. Okay. Now, once we've gotten down to the before tax cash flow, we can start to then look at what is our loan going to look like. All right? So we've got two input cells here. One for the interest rate, one for the loan term in years. Okay? So this is a piece of information that you're going to have to obviously search out and find. What is the prevailing interest rate for this particular type of property in this particular market at this particular point in time? Okay? And that number is obviously going to change, depending on what the conditions are and what the viability that the lender perceives about your project, how strong your financial position is, how many projects you've done, the success of those projects. All of those things are taken in tandem together to come up with what is the interest rate they're potentially going to charge you. Okay? Makes sense. From there are a variety of different loan packages that are going to be available from any given lender. And as I talked to you about in the finance class, lenders are like retailers. Every single one has a different deal, okay? Some, it may be a lower interest rate loan with a longer term, or a higher interest rate and a shorter term, or all kinds of origination fees or prepayment penalties, all that sort of stuff. But in this, all we're simply saying is, what is the amortization term or the loan term that the lender is going to put on offer to you? Now, for multifamily residential, you might be able to find some that are 30-year amortizations, okay? Certain special programs. Others might only be 25, 20, or 15 years. But that is going to dictate what your monthly payment, or more specifically, what your loan amount is going to be, because we're sort of backing into the loan amount. All right, so we're putting in the interest rate, we're putting in the term, we know what the annual debt service is, so what we're going to be doing is we're back solving for what is the present value of the loan, okay? Does that make sense? So if you look at the cell, all right, let's take a look at what we've got here. All right, we're solving for the present value of the loan. So the first thing that we're doing, taking cell D33, which in this case is the interest rate, okay? Well, loan payments almost always are going to be made on a monthly basis. So we need to convert this into a monthly sort of interest rate and a monthly payment, monthly term, that sort of thing, okay? So what we're doing is we're taking that cell D33, which is the interest rate, dividing it by 12 to make it monthly. Okay, is everybody cool with that?
Yes.
Okay, then we're taking cell D34 right below it, which is the term. Well, that's 25 years, but months, that's 25 years times 12 months in a year, that's going to be what? 300 months, yes? Okay. Now, then we're going to go over and we're going to take cell D35, which is the annual debt service. That's your total principal and interest payment for the year. And we're going to divide that by 12 to get a monthly figure. Okay? And then ultimately, once you put that in, then Excel will solve that. And that's where you get 55,022,573.43. Okay, so that is your maximum loan amount based upon all of the assumptions that come before it. Okay, so let's take it and modify a couple of things just to see what impact it would have. All right, so let's start with the interest rate. Okay, let's just, first of all, just so that we don't forget, we're saying that right now our maximum loan amount is $55,022,573.43. Okay? But let's change the interest rate. Now let's see what happens. Let's say that we get a much better deal on the interest rate, we go to 4%. Boom. Okay? That increases our borrowing capacity by roughly an extra couple of $1 million. Okay? Is everybody cool with that? Does that make sense? Okay? Let's say that in addition to getting that lower interest rate, we can also stretch out the term from 25 years to 30 years. Okay? Wow. So that increases our borrowing capacity that much more. So basically, just by changing those two things, we go from a borrowing capacity for this property of 55 million to 64 million. Okay? That changes things dramatically in terms of what we may be able to do in terms of the purchase price and the construction cost and everything else associated with that property, just by changing those two variables. Okay, does that make sense? This is where, you know, whenever you're dealing with your own personal mortgage, you don't get too excited about this sort of thing, okay? Because, you know, it shaves off a little bit here and there, that sort of thing. But when you're talking about a project of this size, a teeny little change in your interest rate and a teeny little change in your term can make all the difference in the world with respect to your borrowing capacity, okay? So this is why you're pretty much always going to have somebody on your staff literally chasing down lenders that are going to give you the best possible deal, because that can literally make or break your project. Okay? So just sort of accepting whatever the first deal that comes across your desk, you know, may not be the one that is really going to, you know, give you the best overall return. Okay. So let's go back and put those numbers back the way they were so we don't screw anything else up. Okay, 25 years. Okay, now, so everybody understands how we get the loan amount from using the present value function. Okay, now the next piece is to calculate the implied property value. Okay, now what I mean here is, if we know what the maximum debt is, we also are given another restriction by the lender, which is the loan-to-value ratio. Okay? Well, the loan-to-value ratio so much for I really do miss the good old days of the chalkboards. Okay, so a loan-to-value ratio is equal to the loan amount divided by the property value. Okay? Loan amount divided by the property value. Okay, if this is our loan amount, all right, and the lender tells us that they're going to restrict us in the sense that they're going to give us a maximum loan to value, and actually I kind of scrolled up a little bit too early on that, right there, 75%. They're saying we can only borrow 75% of the property's value. Does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no?
Yeah.
But what we're doing is we're working backwards, okay? So we're saying this is the loan they're willing to give us, and if our loan to value ratio is 75%, then from that, what is the implied property value? That's the reason I use those words, implied, because we're basing it on what is the maximum loan they'll give us, which is based upon the income. What is the loan to value that they're willing to give us? So we're going to take the 55 million divided by 0.75. Divided by 0.75. And so that should give us an implied property value of 73,363,431.24. Okay, is everybody cool with that? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, I'm seeing a little bit of a confusion in a couple people's eyes. All right, so let's kind of go down here just real quick. Take a look at that. So the formula is really simple. It's just like what I've got written up on the board. We're simply taking D36, which is the loan amount, divided by G19, which is the 75% loan to value ratio. Okay? So what that's saying, here's the way to look at it. Normally, when you approach this, it's kind of the other way around. Okay? Which is where you've got a property that you want to buy, and the property has an asking price of, let's say, 73 million. And the lender says, okay, I'll lend you 75% of that. Great. Then you take that number, multiply it by 75%, and then you get the loan amount. All we're doing is the reverse, okay? And basically saying, working it from the other direction, what would be the implied value from the lender's perspective, given that loan to value ratio requirement. Okay, is everybody clear with that? Yep?
Yeah.
All right, now, what does that number inherently mean? Well, if we use that, kind of from this point forward, that's basically saying that's the total amount of money we had to really develop this project, okay? To acquire the land, to build the building, get it leased up, that's the total amount we have available to us, okay? Everybody cool with that? Now, here's the thing. Let's say that you figure out with your construction costs, your land cost, and everything else, your total all in is 80 million. We can't do it, or at least based upon this analysis. Now, we might be able to make some assumption changes in the sense of lowering the interest rate, extending the term, and then it might become viable. But we don't want to just screw around with it to try to make it viable. You know, we want to be realistic in whatever those, you know, assumption changes are. Does that make sense? Okay? So, but on the flip side, if we come in, we do our construction, we've got our land, everything, and our all-in price hovers right around 70 million, we've got a potentially very viable deal. Does that make sense? Okay? That's the way to look at it. Now, moving forward. Okay, cap rate, or in this case, the implied cap rate. All right? You remember, the cap rate is basically our good friend ERG. Okay? So you've got net operating income we've got our cap rate, and we've got our value. All right? All right? We know what our implied value is. That's the 73,363,431.24. We know what our net operating income is. We still kind of have that here blurred out, but that's 4,771,000. Okay? So if we take net operating income divided by this implied value, we're going to get our implied cap rate. Does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Okay? So let's just see. All right, 4,771,000 divided by 73,363,431.21. We end up with an implied cap rate of 0.650323999, or we're basically rounding it off to 6.5%. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the calculation right here on the spreadsheet that says implied cap rate. Okay. Another phrase for that is your going in cap rate. Okay, you'll hear a lot of people sort of talk about your going in cap rate and then your reversion cap rate or cap rate on sale, that sort of thing. But this is your going in cap rate going into the deal. It's 6.5% implied. Okay? Everybody still with me?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the next piece would be, what is our required equity in this deal? All right? So, the required equity is simply going to be what's the difference between the value of the property and the loan amount. So you're simply going to take that 73 million, subtract out the 55 million, and that's going to give you 18.3 million. Everybody follow that? Mm-hmm. Okay, anybody question on that? Okay, all right. Now, that's for the most part, the toughest stuff. Okay. Now we come down to doing a very basic calculation that most people kind of want to see. What is your before tax return on equity for that first year? Okay? So this is sort of like, in one sense it's saying, you know, for each year that we sort of own this property, or at least for this first year, what are we really earning on the amount of money that we have put in up front? Okay, does that make sense? Also called a cash on cash return. Okay? So in this case, this before tax return on equity is simply taking that first year of before tax cash flow and dividing it by the amount of equity that you've put into the property. Okay? So in this case, what that's going to be is we've got, again, totally out of board space. These are worthless. It is terrible. All right, so 1.1 million. All right, that is our before tax cash flow for year one, yes?
Yeah.
Then we divide that by our equity, which in this case is at 340,857.81, and that's going to give us our before tax return on equity of roughly 6%. Okay, so probably you're going to carry out some zeros there, but 6%. Okay, make sense, everybody? So that's just a real simple thing. The real meaning of it is just sort of saying, it's kind of like you've put that money into a bank account, and the first year, here are the dividends, here's the interest that it basically earned. And it's basically 6%, and that's the number, okay? Makes sense?
Yeah.
All right. Now, resale cap rate. Okay, we talked about the implied going in cap rate. Now we're going to talk about selling this property. So at the end of 5 years, we want to sell the property. All right? Now, what has happened over that 5 years? We've leased up the property. It's stabilized in terms of the income. So now it becomes more of an investment grade asset, okay? That somebody that, like a pension fund or some sort of life insurance company or some real estate investment trust, whoever is going to be really interested in probably buying the property, because now you've worked out all the kinks and you've got it to the point of where it's simply throwing off income, and then they just got to manage it each year, okay, in terms of keeping it leased and keeping it repaired and paying the bills. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, the reason I'm explaining that is normally that would then mean that your cap rate on the resale is going to be less than the cap rate going in, okay? Because the cap rate going in is basically saying you need to be generating a higher rate of return going into this deal because there's a lot more risk. But once the deal is kind of done, you've proven the performance of the property, now you can sell it at a much higher price and a much lower cap rate or rate of return to the investor. Does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, so in this case, the going in cap rate was 6.5%. The resale cap rate, I just arbitrarily put it 5.5%, so a full percentage less. All right? Now, what we're then going to do is we're going to calculate, well, what would the resale price be at the end of year 5? All right. Now, this is where we've talked about this before, but you may or may not remember. In order to get a resale price at the end of year 5, you need to know what the projected income is for year 6. Okay? Because the cap rate is forward-looking in terms of what is the income for this next year projected to be. Now I can calculate a return based on that. Okay? So that is why you take a look at the spreadsheet. It goes all the way out to year 6 in terms of your NOI calculation. All right? And the purpose for that is so now we can calculate the value of the property using the resale cap rate. Does that make sense? All right? Now, just to start off, we started off the first year 4.7 million as our net operating income. Now we've got 5.2 million. That's a pretty sizable jump, and that's a good thing. I think everybody's going to be happy about that. But to find our resale price, we're going to take that 5,274,744, all right, and we're going to basically say, okay, once again, our cap rate over here was, I think what we said, 6.5% or 5, was it 5.5 or 6.5? 5.5%, and then now solve for basically what would be the implied value, okay? So in doing that, $5,274,744 divided by 0.055, 95,904,436. Okay? Does that match up to what we have here? Well, slightly different only because of rounding. Okay? But basically the 95,904,447. Okay? So what that's saying is this project that originally cost us or was valued at $73 million, you right with me?
Yeah.
5 years later, we're able to sell for almost $21, $22 million more because the income has grown and stabilized and has less risk. And so now we're able to make some real money off of this deal. Is everybody cool with that? Yes or no? Okay, this is the developer's dream, okay, to have this happen. All right. So from that, we have one other little calculation we need to do to be able to do some of our return calculations down here. And we have to figure out what is our loan balance at the end of year 5. Because when we go to sell the property, if we have a loan outstanding, we have to do what? Pay off the loan, okay? So the money that we're going to get when we sell the property, we're going to get the selling price minus the loan balance, and that's going to give us our total reversion or the total amount we get to keep. Yes?
Angelo's fees.
Angelo's fees, yes. Okay, all right. So the loan balance, how I got that, you can do this obviously in Excel, you can do it in a calculator, but basically, you're just solving for future value. And what you're doing here is, once again, you're taking, in this case, so D33 divided by 12, which a recollection that should be what the interest rate. Let's see here. Yep. Make sure I'm not lying to you. Okay, you're taking the interest rate divided by 12. Now, for the term, what you're putting in here is 60 months. The reason for 60, that's 5 years. 5 years times 12 months in the year, 60 months. So what we're wanting to know is, what is the payoff amount or the loan balance at the end of 60 months or 5 years? Okay, so thus the 60. Now, if we chose to have a different term, we'd have to replace that number, okay? All right? Then we take cell D35, which is the annual debt service. We convert that into a monthly payment, so we divide that by 12. And then D36, which is the loan amount, put that in as the original amount, and then Excel solves it for us. Then we get 48 million. So what we're saying, just make sure everybody's clear. This loan that we originally got up here of 55 million, after 5 years, that loan balance has gone from 55 million to 48 million. Is everybody clear with that? Yes or no? Good with that? Yeah. Okay, just making sure.
The principal you paid down.
Yep, so in other words, that's how much, in essence, we still owe at the end of 5 years.
That's the balance of the loan.
That's the balance of the loan. How much we still owe that we have to pay off. Okay, everybody crystal clear?
Which is what you're going to minus out of your profit.
Yes. Okay, all right. Now then. We're going to start with the more complicated and work back to the easy. All right, so we're going to start over here with this column, which what we're doing is we're going to be calculating our internal rate of return and our net present value for the project. Okay. So we have two different approaches to this. Okay. This approach is sort of our leveraged approach where we're borrowing money. Okay. This approach over here on the left-hand side says unleveraged. That means that we are not borrowing money. You're making an assumption it's an all-cash deal. Okay? It's not an all-cash deal, but we just kind of want to see what the returns would be if it were an all-cash deal versus one that we borrow money and we've leveraged. Okay, but let's go ahead and go with the leverage one. All right? So, in order to do our calculations here, we have to put in how much money did we spend? How much money did we put out in the deal? All right? So for the leverage model, what does that 18 million 3 represent?
That's your
Your initial equity. Okay, so if you go back up in the spreadsheet and you look, what was our equity? 18.3 million. Okay, so that's your initial cash outflow at time period 0, meaning right here, right now. Okay, a year from now, your before tax cash flow, the cash flow that you would get to keep after all the bills are paid, after all the interest and principal is paid on the loan, so forth, is that 1.1 million, which if you look back, that's your before tax cash flow for that first year. Okay? If you look year 2, 3, 4, okay, all of those match up. Yes? Okay. Now, what is happening here in year 5? In year 5, you have two numbers that are being added together. One is your before tax cash flow for year 5. The other number that is included here is going to be whatever dollar amount you have left over after paying off your loan. So in other words, you're going to take whatever that resale amount was in year 5, subtract out your loan balance, that's going to be your proceeds, and that's going to be added in here. So take a look at the formula. Okay, that's what I've done. Okay, so once again, just simply taking what the before tax cash flow was for year 5, and then adding that to basically the resale minus the loan balance to give us our loan proceeds. Okay, everybody kosher with that? Yes, no, possibly could be. Okay, now. Okay, then we go down to calculate internal rate of return. All right. Now, for those of you that have never taken a finance class before, internal rate of return is just simply what is our rate of returning our income to us, or in other words, what is the percentage that we're getting on this particular investment over a specific time horizon, okay? So in this case, our annualized internal rate of return leveraged is 25%. Now what that means, just in very simple terms, if you put money into this deal, equity money, you're getting a 25% annualized return. Now, what you hopefully are saying to yourself is, how is that possible? Because I thought you said up here we were only getting something like a 6% rate of return in terms of our before tax return on equity. Well, that's off of the operating income. Where you're getting your big bump is off of the sale of the asset. That asset went up $20 million in value, so that's where the real cash flow is coming from to give you the rate of return that you really want and desire as an equity player. Does that make sense? You're betting on that, okay? Now, let's just kind of back up here for a second. This cap rate, let's say that we aren't able to get a 5.5%, that there's still perceived to be a lot of risk associated with it. Let's say that's a 7% cap rate. So that means we sell it at a smaller dollar amount, making a smaller profit. That begins to eat away at our annualized internal rate of return, okay? In other words, very simple, just to make sure that, you know, once again, we'll just oversimplify this. If we sell the asset for less than what we were selling it for, we're getting a lower rate of return, okay? That's all we're saying here. So if we keep changing, say we make it 9%, now all of a sudden, we're effectively losing money. Because now, what's happening, if you look at this resale price, that's less than we actually paid for the property, and the operating income is not sufficient to make up that difference, so now we end up with a loss. So that's where it becomes so mission critical that you've got to, you know, hopefully in that 5-year time horizon that you're owning the asset, that at the end of that 5 years, you hope that you're able to sell it for more than you obviously have invested in it, otherwise you end up in a situation like that. Now, what could be, you know, the actual scenario is, okay, the market has turned. You know, all of a sudden, this particular type of asset is no longer as valuable as what it was. your best alternative might actually be holding on to it a little while longer, as long as it's positive cash flowing, and waiting for the market to possibly readjust. Or, if you don't really have a choice, you may be forced to sell it at a loss. Okay? But those are basically your options. Okay? All right, so let's go back. Let's go back to where it was. The original one was what, 5.5%?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So that gives us, and just so you can see what the internal rate of return is doing, is it's simply taking this 5 years worth of data of cash flow streams, the outflow, and then all of the inflows, and saying, what is that rate of return? Now, the thing that you see here, and I know Oz has asked this question, you know, in previous class, you know, what is this, you know, sort of guess value? I wish I could give you a really, really good explanation, but, well, I can, but the issue of whenever Excel was sort of first built, the algorithm they used to calculate internal rate of return, they did it using an iterative function. And that iterative function, which means kind of like a repeating function, needed a seed value to sort of as a starting point, and then it basically would play this high-low game. Okay, is the internal rate of return up here? Nope, that's too high. Is the internal rate of return down here? Nope, that's too low. And then eventually it kind of, sort of compresses to the point of where it actually gets the number you're searching for, the internal rate of return. But for whatever reason, the programmers, I think they just sort of left it in there as kind of almost an artifact of the past. We don't really need that, but yet they still have it in there. But it's almost pointless. You can pretty much put in 0.1, 0.01. All that really means is you're sort of starting at 10% and it's working its way up or down, okay? But for the purposes of anything really legitimately important, you don't need to be worried about it. Okay, now, the next piece is net present value. Net present value is basically saying you as an investor in this deal, you have some sort of a base rate of return that you must get. And normally we call that the hurdle rate, which is, the reason they call it the hurdle rate is it's something that you've got to jump over, okay, that you've got to beat. You've got to get it above that, okay? And so the minimum hurdle rate that we have sort of set for this project, the net present value rate, is 10%. Not a very high hurdle rate, but nonetheless, that's the rate that we've set. So what we're saying with this net present value calculation is, all right, we are giving you your 10% rate of return, but we're also giving you the cash above and beyond that 10% rate of return. Okay, you're saying, huh? Okay, this will make it much more clear. As we raise this hurdle rate to, let's say, 15%, we have less cash. So what we're saying there is, all right, we go from a 10% hurdle rate, we get more cash. We go to a 15% hurdle rate, we get less cash. Okay, so what they're saying is, okay, we're giving you your 15%, but you have less cash left over. Okay, well, that still doesn't make sense. Let's raise it to 20. Even less money. Let's go to 22%. Whoops. Less money. 24%. Less money. 25.92. Huh. We lost money. Okay. Well, if we put it at 25.91, it should be 0. Now, the reason it's not 0 is because of rounding. Okay? In other words, look at this. If we are able to, let's see here. Oh, I hate this version of Excel.
Try to push up and
Well, anyway, all right. Just suffice it to say, if we were to kick the decimals out on this, what you would see is it's not, the internal rate of return is not precisely 25.91, okay? It's something slightly different than that, and so therefore by us just simply populating 25.91 here, we're not going to get fully a zero number, but we should if it's precisely the same. The point is this, backing away from this, the project is yielding a 25.9% rate of return, yes? But now what we're saying with the net present value is if that's our hurdle rate, then basically we're not making any money, we're breaking even at a 25.91% rate. Does everybody understand that? So in other words, if our hurdle rate were higher, let's say 30%. Well, basically what we're saying there is yes, the project may be cash flowing, but we're not meeting our established rate of return of 30%. We're only getting 25.9%. Therefore, what it's really, our deficit, if you will, in terms of the money that we needed to generate extra would have been 2.5 million. So the only way that we could basically make this work is if there's a way we could squeeze out more cash in terms of the sale of the asset, possibly. So like, for example, just leaving that at 30, and we go up here to the cap rate. Well, what if we can lower that to 5%? Woohoo! There we go. All right? By getting that down to a 5% cap rate, we've increased our resale, all right, to 105 million. Now all of a sudden, that allows us to get a 30% internal rate of return, so we meet our hurdle rate and we make another 91 grand in our back pocket. Is everybody cool with that? Okay? Okay, let's put those numbers back to where they were.
That hurdle rate is, that's the money we must make to make the, for us, to make the project viable, right?
Yes.
It'll work anyway, but
It's basically you internally, you and your investors are saying, we absolutely have to get a 10% hurdle rate for this project to work for us.
if you got just that, you still, but you make the money that you set up.
Right.
So anything above and beyond
Is
is what the,
additional profit.
is additional profit.
Okay? Make sense?
Got it.
All right. Okay. I said I was going to take you from the more complex to the easy. Okay, so now, is everybody cool with that? Yes? It's the final piece of it, and then we're done with this other than questions. All right, so over here is the unleveraged model. So that means this model is just simply making the assumption that we don't borrow any money. It's an all-cash deal, and what will the returns be off of that? Okay, so in other words, we were like mega rich, got all the money we possibly need, we don't need to borrow any money from anybody, what would be, you know, sort of our rate of return under that scenario? Okay, so here, what does this $73 million represent? The overall project cost, okay? All in, $73 million. Then, the numbers that we would be able to use for the cash flows will be the net operating income. Well, why not the forecast cash flow? Because we have no debt, okay? So, the only difference between net operating income and the forecast cash flow is the debt piece. So if we don't have any debt, we're able to take all of that money, okay? And then at the end, you've got the resale of the 95 million. You get to keep all of that because there's no basically loan outstanding. So you add that to whatever your year 5 NOI was, and you get the 101 million as your total basically sale price plus 5th year income. Yes? Mm-hmm. All right. So you do the unleveraged calculation on that, and you get 11.62. It's still not horrible. That's actually, it's pretty good. You know, most people will probably be okay with that. But that's tying up a lot of cash. Okay? That's tying up $73 million in cash. Okay? Most people don't want to do that. That's what lenders are for. Okay? All right? So, but that's okay. But even with that, okay, 11.62, if our hurdle rate is still 10%, we're still going to make, on top of getting what we desired as a base rate of 10%, on our cash money, we're still gonna get almost a $5 million profit on the deal, above and beyond our required rate of return of 10%. Does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no? Okay, now, as I said, the purpose of this today was to kind of walk everybody through, remind everybody that some of you obviously haven't taken the financial investments course, some of you have, but to try to put in a relatively basic model most of what you need to do for the project, okay? Because what your judges are going to be basically, concerned with is, all right, first of all, they're going to ask you questions about your unit mix. They're going to say, potentially, why did you have so many or so few of a particular unit type? And your response should be, we looked at the market, we felt like here was the opportunity with this particular unit type. So if you look at the market and the market is telling you you've got 100% occupancy of all studio units, then maybe you need to increase the number of studio units and ignore maybe the others. Or if the market is telling you something totally different. No one wants a studio. We've got all families with, a half a dozen kids and they all want, 3 bedrooms or more, okay? Well, that's what, you've got to basically explain that, okay? Justify that. And then you've got to justify the square footage sizes. You've got to be able to say, here is maybe the market type, but we're going maybe against the market for whatever reasons. We're going with a smaller unit type. We're going with a bigger unit type. Whatever justifications that you have, express those. And then ultimately, what does that translate into in terms of the monthly rent for each of those respective unit types and whatever explanation that you are able to give to say, yeah, the market in this particular area bears a $2.50 per square foot unit price for this particular size of unit, and be able to justify that. Does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Those are the kind of questions you're going to get. All right. Then you come on down to, excuse me, the assumptions. And once again, you may have a judge that says, why are you using a 2% growth rate? Why not 3? Why not 1? Once again, do your best to explain that, saying we looked at the market, we looked at rents last year, we looked at the rents before last year, and here's how they've been trending. Okay? Vacancy, same sort of thing. We looked at similar projects, here's what the vacancy rates have been, here's what we're expecting to be. Now, under no circumstances should you ever have a 0% vacancy. Okay? I guarantee you the judges will come unglued. Okay? Because they will say you're always going to have frictional vacancy. You're always going to have people moving in, moving out, moving on, and even at an absolute minimum, that's probably going to be 5% a year. Okay? So, don't get too cocky in saying, okay, yeah, our project is, so incredibly wonderful and super that it's not going to have any vacancies at all. Okay? Not going to happen. Okay? But also don't get crazy and say, okay, we're going to have a bunch of deadbeat tenants and we're going to have a 30% vacancy, and that's probably not, realistic either. Okay? All right. Other income. I think it would behoove you to think about any and all other sources of other income that you could potentially generate from the property. Okay? I only listed a couple of things like parking and vending machines. But think of what are other ancillary services that your property could offer to ultimately, make it that much more viable. Now, the other thing I left out of this one on purpose was if you decide to have some additional space that's used for something else, you've got to put that in. If you actually want to, even create another line for parking. Number of spaces, cost per space per month, that sort of thing, you could very easily do that. You could also sort of say, okay, well, one of these might be the retail space on the ground floor, to where maybe we have a restaurant or a bar or something else on the ground floor or the bottom couple of floors. Or maybe we even have it split up as the bottom part of the building is office space and the top part is residential. Or, whatever you come up with, that's fine. But you need to still kind of include that in how your income is being derived. Okay? Make sense?
Yes.
All right? All right, same thing on the growth rate and the income. You know, what is it you're using as a foundation for that? And when they're going to definitely ding you on the operating expenses as a percentage of EGI, do you have any data to support that? If you said, Dr. Forkey used that as an example in class, they're going to say, bullshit, okay? So basically, you need to try to find, you know, a decent source for whatever number that you're going to use for the operating expense ratio, okay? You know, looking at things like BOMA, Building Owners and Managers Association, they're one of the sources out there. They publish all sorts of data as it relates to operating expenses for properties and for different markets. Okay, and then the debt coverage ratio, same thing. Check that out. Don't just use 1.3 because this is what I used in the example in class, okay? You need to verify that, ask a lender or two. I mean, you guys have obviously got Mark Peterson as your mentor. You should be able to just straight out ask him, what would be a normal debt coverage ratio for a property like this, okay? And same sort of thing on the loan to value ratio, all right?
Check mark.
Can I get his email? Do you have his email, please?
All right.
Yeah, we do have that information available for trade.
For trade, yes.
What are you guys interested in?
Okay.
Let's-
All right, so moving on, same thing. Once again, the lender can help you out with the interest rate, the term, and then, you know, all the rest of this kind of flows from this. Now, are you restricted by this model and this approach to the model? Absolutely, positively not. This is just one approach that you can take to get to what you're trying to get at, which is basically how much money are we going to make, you know, and what is the property supposedly going to be valued at, and is it basically financially feasible or not? Make sense? Okay. Everybody clear? All the new people clear? Okay. All right. So I think that's pretty much it. You are more, as I said, more than welcome to take this base model and do with it as you please. But as I said at the very beginning of today, under no circumstances should this be transplanted into your PowerPoint slides. You need to figure out, you know, what makes sense to put in the PowerPoint slides to, you know, get to the core issues, and then what you choose to include in your written report. Once again, you know, up to you as to, you know, how much depth and what explanation. But I think in the written report, as in your oral report, and I can't stress this enough, you probably ought to highlight what your assumptions are, or where you got that piece of information. You know, however you choose to do it is up to you. But I mean, you know, one very simple thing would be to have, like, you know, if you've got this in your written report, then right underneath it, then you could write, okay, the unit mix was determined by blah, 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 we sourced it from blah, 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 and this is what we ended up with. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Same thing for each of the assumptions. We chose a 2% growth rate because of blah, 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 and so forth. Put that in the report. Okay? All right, we good? Okay. Do you feel like you're reasonably prepared now to finish up your financial analysis if you haven't already? Yes? Okay. Okay.
As a reform.
Okay. All right. So at this point, you should be pretty much good to go. All right. You've got your mentors coming in at 10 o'clock. Should be here for a couple of hours to help you out with whatever other, you know, issues that you can, you know, sort of bring up to them. You can play around with this if you want to, basically for the next 45 minutes, and kind of maybe try to plug in your own numbers and see what you sort of end up with. But that's pretty much where we are right now. Okay, so here's the plan. For the next 45 minutes, work in your groups before your mentors get here, figure out anything you need to figure out, maybe play around with the financial model. All that's perfectly appropriate. Take a quick break, that's also appropriate. All right, but make sure you're back here at 10 o'clock. We'll do kind of the same thing we did last time. We'll figure out some adjacent rooms for you guys to move into. We've got the paper over there if you want to take that and a marker with you. Then we're going to come back at 12:30 for the e-portfolio class. And I think all of you were in the e-portfolio class, yes?
Yeah.
And so I think the only person that's not here that is in the portfolio is Mo. But the way we're going to do that, let's just go ahead and pass this out now.
Did you get my change?
Yes.
Okay.
A couple of people changed their site address, that's the reason I'm passing this out.
Some of the costs are like.
Okay, go ahead and pass those down real quick, and I'll explain who you're going to evaluate. You're going to evaluate 4 people. Okay, everybody going to pass down? Got enough? Everybody got enough?
This is mine, actually. Oh, you gave him yours? No, it's just
Okay, has anybody's address changed?
I'm so sorry.
Well, email everybody in the class,
Okay.
or email the people who are going to be evaluating it, and I'll explain how that's going to work. Okay, everybody have a list? Okay. Sounds like there's still 2 people that have changed their address again. Okay, I thought this was the most complete list or most accurate list, but apparently it's not. So here's how you're going to do it. I sent out an email yesterday that basically says you're going to answer 2 questions. One question is going to be basically what's good about their site. Okay? Now, what I don't want you to do is just simply say, site looks good. Done. Not going to cut it. Okay? You need to say what specifically about the site looked good. Give specific examples. Say, really liked the overall design of the site, liked that you did a great job with your video, and here's what I liked about it specifically. It was, very succinct, to the point, very engaging, all that sort of stuff. That's where you're going to build everybody up. But then the next question is where you're going to tear everybody down, okay? So and that's really going to be the more super critical. What I want is for you to pull out the knife blades, okay, on the second question, on the critical piece. I want you to go after every nitpicky detail of what you don't like about their site, okay? Look at it from the eyes of a potential employer. Look at it in the eyes from a potential investor. Look at it from the eyes of an advisory board member of the program. Look at it from the eyes of a prospective student to the program. So, look at it from all these different perspectives. What would you include? What would you not include? What would you change? What would you not change? What would you, basically do differently? And as I said, be as critical as you possibly can be. Realizing that a couple of the people that you're evaluating are also going to be evaluating you, and I want them to be as equally critical of you as well in the way this is going to work. So the simple method that I have for who you evaluate and who you don't, it's alphabetical. You're going to evaluate the 2 people that precede you on the list and the 2 people that are after you on the list. So as an example, if you're Kyle Tuthill, you're going to evaluate Alana Oslin, and then you're going to go up to the top of the list and evaluate Anthony and Brandon. Okay? So if you're Nathan Johnson, you're going to evaluate Cynthia, Christina, Ryan, and Aaron. Okay? Yep.
Where do you write all this criticism?
Okay. I was just about to get to that. All right. So what you're going to do, you're going to send out a total of 5 emails. Okay? Oh, I know. It's so tough. Okay. The first email is going to go to the first person on your list, and you're going to address those 2 questions that I sent you via email yesterday of what's good and then what's bad. All right? And it should be much more than, as I said, just a few words. It should be easily 2 or 3 paragraphs, okay, for the good things and for the bad things.
That's one email.
One email.
Okay.
Second person, same thing. Third person, same thing. Fourth person, same thing. Then the 5th email that you're going to send is to me. That's going to include all 4 of the emails that you sent to everybody else. What I want is a combined email where you basically are cutting and pasting from the other 4 emails that you sent into one singular email to me. So that way, instead of me getting basically like 120 emails, I only get about 30. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that way, what I'm going to do then is just use that, number 1, make sure you did what you were supposed to do. And number 2, whenever I go toward the grading, one of the things I'm going to be looking at is how thorough were you with your review of the folks, your peer group. Okay? Now, you're given basically until the end of 2 o'clock today to get those sent to the 4 people and to me. Does that make sense? So in other words, 12:30, when we come back from lunch, you've got an hour and a half. An hour and a half should be plenty for you to be able to do those 4 analyses. So that basically is saying you've got a good, 20-ish minutes or more to do each one. Yep.
Like revisions first?
Yes. Okay. That was the next phase of this. So the next phase is then after you receive that feedback today from the 4 peer reviewers, you're going to take all of those comments and then you're going to go back to your site, and between now and next week, you're going to make all those revisions that you feel like are appropriate and that you can make. Now, and then next week, you will then be presenting the final product. We'll pull them all up here. You'll walk everybody kind of through very quickly, just sort of, here's what I did, so forth, so on. Should be very quick, fairly painless, but it gives everybody a chance to sort of look at them and kind of see and maybe get some even additional ideas. But part of the reason for this review process is so that you are forced to look at 4 other sites so that you get maybe some ideas of, oh my God, you did an absolutely amazing job with this piece of it. I want to do the same thing. Okay? That's what you want to try to accomplish. Okay?
I just thought that we had some time to go home and look at but you answered my question.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Any questions? Pretty straightforward, huh? Okay? So once again, all of that needs to be turned to the e-portfolio needs to be done by 2 o'clock. So now, you technically have the option of leaving here and going and doing it somewhere else. I don't care. As long as I get it by 2 p.m. And I'm going to be like Sam Miguel on this. If it is not to me by 2 p.m., it ain't going to count. Okay? So make sure you get it to me by 2 p.m. All right? All right. Any other thoughts, questions, observations? Okay.
Adrian, thank you.
And we're going to do yours individually.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'm sorry, for the what you don't like about it, you want paragraphs or like?
Yeah. We want paragraphs, bullet points. Tear it up. Pretend that, you have got to be a critic. And I don't want anyone to take any of it personally. That's the thing, okay? Even though it's going to seem like it's personal, but it's also why I have to give you the good stuff first, followed by the bad stuff, okay?
Definitely the bad stuff first.
I don't care. Either way, you work it out.
I don't care.
All right. Make sense? All right. Do what you need to do in your groups, and we'll wait for the mentors.
Down.
It needs lots of work.
Yeah,
Already, you know, like.
be gentle. No, actually, don't be gentle. I won't take it.
Already. Gave you all the comments.
No, but you gotta be critical of that. Because it's not perfect.
I gotta look at it like, fine, fine.
I'll explain
I
it.
didn't find it, I just looked at it, I was just like.
No, you're just looking at it.
Yeah, I know what it was.
wedding.
I was like, oh, yeah, this
Like
is-
all the stuff like
You knew that we were gonna get excited.
Oh, really?
If I would have known, I would have probably just a little like pre.
Yeah, just butter up a little bit. Give me like Kyle bringing donuts. Pick up your donuts.
Yeah, how did you do?
Let's get it out by groups that use that
I
stuff.
was supposed to get my,
The most I could find,
my
the latest
best
was like
friends, and I was like, you know
between
what?
late 2017,
I was gonna get it.
2018.
So I was like, you know what?
We can't do
So we can use the base
We have a
information
mutual
that we got
friend that
for
is
those
kind of
products.
Yeah.
Use the
They're
work
like,
rate.
yeah.
It is what
He's messed up on that.
now.
The
The only thing I just find is concrete that I'm like,
I'm like, people want to.
concrete.
Right, that's what you want, the roller coaster.
Exactly. And like you can find like
Yeah, I'm
natural
like,
average for instance hotels outside.
let's get it right, shaky.
They know at least Florida, but in any regard, it's really natural rate. It's also the same time as the only thing that I'm sticking on now is just
She sent us all
Yeah, and you still say.
Right, because
I
that
think
was
this
the plan on
works,
the operating.
because I did,
yeah. Because like you kind of need one, you got the other one.
Yeah.
I thought you would be asking, because I was like, I didn't get anything. I overfeel.
And the way I was kind of figuring it is that like it's
Stay away.
the first site, we have to, you can take the total square footage and then
Oh my gosh.
like you need some kind of access road. No,
That's part of a trade. That's part of a trade. That's part of a
room, and the other side can be parking garage. Like the first 5 levels of parking garage, and above that is room. But for the while, this kind of like looking at an access road on that side, maybe 10 feet. So that's gonna take a total square footage in terms of building up, but for this one, you get a little pretty much parking lot.
we could kind of go with
In
that.
terms of base side, in terms
So,
of square
so
footage.
here I found this website.
You don't. It kind of look like the,
And I was looking like this,
like the 3D
same
model,
type,
right?
right?
Yeah,
Like not on the
Like
water,
that, I had like a
land.
like tower, so that would be like this part, and this part is the
It's
straight.
kind of like.
Oh, without the overlay. Or we could do going on that, but I prefer to
So I
have
did a lot of that,
a smaller footprint on this
Together
side,
with the
just so we have like an access road to go
play around with it.
around. Because anytime you have like some